Good afternoon, everybody. This is Bonnie Vandermeulen, Training Coordinator for Wisconsin Facets. On behalf of our entire Wisconsin Facets staff, I'd like to thank you for joining us today. Today's webinar is entitled Inclusive Supports for Students with Autism Spectrum Disorders. It is my pleasure today to introduce to you Shannon Stewart. Shannon is a professor at the University of Wisconsin-Whitewater. She coordinates the Special Education Department's graduate program and Autism Specialist Certificate program. Her research interests include inclusive supports for learners with individual learning needs. It is my pleasure today to introduce Shannon Stewart. Shannon?
Hi, y'all. Thanks for joining us on this snowy winter day in Wisconsin. I'm webinaring from my home today, and I hope all of you are safe and comfortable wherever you are. The purpose of the presentation today is to describe inclusive supports for students with ASD. And the student supports or strategies that I will share today are priming, general academic modifications, visual supports, reinforcement, and a strategy called home base. And I provided you with a handout with online links to each of these strategies. And you can access really good detailed information or support from the National Professional Development Center of Autism Spectrum Disorders. So use the hot links I gave you on the handouts. They'll give you step-by-step specific support for implementing any of these. And you can always shoot me an email as well, too. Right, during this session, we will look at elements of classroom structure, talk about the key supports that you can use in a classroom, and identify supports for you within your school, whether you're a family member or an educator. First, let's talk real briefly, though, about what ASD is and why school can be such a challenging environment for students on the spectrum. ASD is a developmental disorder that impacts the way a person perceives and communicates, often resulting in challenges with social interactions and processing information. Although in this session we'll talk about support specific to the needs of students with ASD, you're going to find that these support strategies really can benefit all students. And again, if you're interested in more information, please check out the links that I provided on the handout. According to the DSM criteria, ASD means persistent deficits in social communication and social interaction across contexts, restrictive, repetitive patterns of behavior, interests, or activities. Symptoms must be present in early childhood. Symptoms can cause clinically significant impairment in social, occupational, or other areas of current functioning. I paused here because I kind of want to make it clear that students with ASD may qualify for special education services, in other words, an IEP, if they need an individualized education plan, if they need individualized instruction or individualized services. Students with autism or ASD may also qualify for 504 services if they need accommodations, but they don't necessarily need an individual education plan. So what I'm trying to get at here is not all students on the autism spectrum may have an IEP. Most certainly would have an IEP. But if you don't need individualized education and supports, You certainly could qualify for a 504 plan if you need modifications to the general ed curriculum. People throughout the years with autism have been our friends, our neighbors, our coworkers. There's speculation whether or not some famous people have had ASD, and we often see people with autism portrayed in the media as having autism, Asperger's syndrome, or the latest definition or label, if you will, autism spectrum disorder. These have been used to describe people who have some of the characteristics and behaviors that we've talked about today. For example, Miss Montana 2013, Alexis Weinman was diagnosed with autism at age 11. Temple Grandin is a university professor in animal science. She's also an author with autism. John Elder Robinson is an author with Asperger's syndrome. Daryl Hannah is an actor, self-identified as having Asperger's syndrome. Max on the TV show Parenthood has Asperger's syndrome, and he's portrayed by Max Burkholder. Mozart is speculated to have autism. Andy Warhol speculated to have autism. Albert Einstein speculated to have autism. So although the criteria for qualifying for ASD changes over time, because of course diagnostic labels are fluid, autism as a disability itself has been around. All right, let's just begin with a discussion of classroom supports for students with ASD. Even when teachers devote their efforts to providing structure and predictability, transitions and change are part of life for all students. Transitions, by definition, are difficult for students with ASD because it requires them to stop what they're doing and refocus on a new activity. Teachers can alleviate some of the anxiety that comes with transitions by having a clear agenda and making it accessible to all students. However, no amount of planning can prevent sudden changes from disrupting a classroom or routine. And, it's during those unpredictable transitions, like a fire drill, a parent dropping in, a pep rally, or early dismissal, snow day, that we should all use what we know about a particular student to provide the necessary supports. But by the time students with ASD get to the classroom, especially the first days of school, there's a good chance that they're already stressed out, unsettled, and preoccupied with one main thought: how can I figure out what it is I'm supposed to do? They're trying to pick out the important information from the environment. And this can be very difficult if you have ASD. And I know we don't have an opportunity to discuss things face to face, but after this webinar is done, I just want you to think about aspects of your school that might make it a challenging environment for someone you know with ASD. In particular, think about your classrooms or assemblies and expectations. So, during this session, we'll discuss ways in which you can support students with ASD in your classroom and in your school building. These supports will not only help students on the spectrum, but they're likely to help other students who struggle with organizing their work, maintaining attention, completing assignments, and so on. I hope you find information that will be useful in practice with multiple students you teach. Structure is key. Structure is key to supporting most students, especially students with ASD. Teaching students with ASD requires creating a supportive learning environment. And this begins with making information accessible and explicit. To provide adequate support for your students, you have to understand their perspective. Think of your classroom as another country with a different culture. The student with ASD is a tourist in that country. And your job is to help the student navigate and understand what is important to pay attention to. A well-structured, predictable classroom can provide comfort for students with ASD and help them and their peers better attend to learning. I have a video clip here, and let's hope it works. I practiced it twice, and once I linked up to facets, it worked, and then another time it didn't. So let's give this a try.
Mrs. Redfern is going to come at the end of the class because you're going to be doing research.
For students with autism, structure in the classroom is critical.
Most individuals with autism get extremely anxious and non-productive in chaotic environments. They are much more organized themselves when they're in organized environments and when task expectations are clear and can be laid out in front of them visually.
So when you walk in my classroom, I provide a list of goals on the board. The homework is very clearly listed. I give an opportunity for students to see that. I talk a little bit about that. I talk about the homework.
So while I'm showing these video clips, think about some of the instructional supports you notice. Another one right here.
For most secondary school students, the classroom is a comfortable environment for learning. That's not always the case for students with autism. For them, the classroom may present a number of visual and auditory distractions. Teachers should be aware of this, particularly when deciding on a seating plan. Some students may struggle unless they sit near the visual supports at the front of the class. Others may find seats near the windows too distracting or may be bothered by the classroom lighting.
One thing that makes it hard is my hypersensitivity. I have a I'm very sensitive to light and loud noises, which it seems a lot of kids my age like.
Sometimes the child can have a support that makes fluorescent lights a little more tolerable, such as, wearing a baseball cap, wearing sunglasses, or even sitting in a certain area of the room.
A well-structured, predictable classroom can provide comfort for students with autism. This includes creating clear physical and visual boundaries.
And art centers are a big idea where you have the glue guns in a spot. That is where you go to use the glue gun. You have a saw in a spot. That is where you go to use the saw. And they like that kind of structure.
So many of you know that you have students with hypersensitivities in your classrooms, or you suspect that you have students with hypersensitivities in your classrooms. Limiting those hypersensitivities may allow students with ASD and others to better attend to learning. So when you're thinking about the students that you know personally and the school environments that you know personally, just think about what you can do in those particular environments to address students' hypersensitivities. Myself, I've learned that fluorescent lightings are a big one. Preferred seating is important. I have some students who prefer to wear caps or prefer to wear headphones. I also have some students who have preferential seating. It might be to the hallway door. It might be next to specific students. So all of those are not autism dependent, they're student dependent. what works for a particular student. And consider ways too to rethink your classroom in general. This is just an online diagram. Lots and lots of these kind of templates are available online, and I'm sure teachers have them too through their districts. But this one lays out a high school science classroom. And when you're using a tool like this before you set your classroom up, you're thinking about ways, visual boundaries, to make the classroom clear to all students, especially students with ASD. Additionally, consider addressing hypersensitivities like smell, storing chemicals far from a student who is sensitive to smell. Or another one is putting computers together so that their flashing screens are not distracting to certain students as they do in-seat work. All right, those were some general classroom elements that are helpful to all students, particularly students with ASD. But the following 5 key support strategies, priming, academic modifications, visual supports, reinforcement, and the use of home base, can also be effective supports for students on the spectrum. And I want to discuss each of these and give you an opportunity to think about ways you could incorporate these in your own school. I love priming. Priming is something we all do, but I bet we don't do it often enough, or we don't do it as often as we think we are doing it. Priming exposes students to materials or tasks before the formal instruction on the content begins. Through priming, we familiarize students with concepts in order to help them be successful. Through priming, we can pre-teach course content and decrease anxiety about new material. Priming works best when it's part of the routine of your classroom or a routine for a particular student whenever you're preparing to present new course content. Consider how to build priming for particular students or for your whole class. For example, after a lesson, you may briefly introduce the big ideas of the next lesson and how they're connected to what was just taught. Also, consider how you might encourage other sources of support, including parents, to use priming when you are about to present new content or a new learning activity. For example, you might send home an agenda of the next week's plan on Friday, or you might have yourself a web blog where you have your lessons for the week posted, the homework assignments posted for everyone. You have a plan online for what will be coming up next. Priming can be used to remind students of expected behaviors. If there's a large assembling happening soon, you might prime a student who struggles with loud noises by saying, let's remember what you can do if it becomes too loud. Some things we've talked about are putting on your headphones or sitting close to the exit so you can walk to the hallway if you need to. Is there anything else you can do?
Excuse me, Shannon.
Yeah.
There is a question for you on priming, and this questioner asks, can priming be reinforced or enforced through an IEP?
Well, typically IEPs don't include specific strategies that teachers must use, but on the front page of most IEPs, you can discuss things that support students. So you can, on the strengths and needs page, you can talk, Shannon does best if instructors prime before they introduce an activity. But an IEP itself are things that a student does rather than a teacher does.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Here's a clip, if I can get it, if I can get it going, of priming. Nope, I missed it, darn it. And I can't, now I have a hard time going back. You all have to give me a minute. This is one of the things where we're live like this. I have to figure out a way to completely shut things off now, or completely go back and exit out. So just bear with me a moment.
At 20, slide 20.
All right, here's a video clip of priming.
A second strategy for teachers is to make academic modifications, adapting the content or format of assignments to meet the student's specific needs.
Academic modifications can range from read aloud directions on tests, extended time on assignments, long-term assignments if they're having trouble doing them at home. Whatever they need, I'm going to provide for them, and I'm going to be patient with them.
It could also be the case that you might have a student who has tremendous difficulty with word retrieval. So maybe I present multiple choice questions. Maybe I present a word bank.
If there's a reading assignment of 30 pages, I do not expect a student with autism to do that, unless that's their competency.
I'm so sorry I got off priming and we jumped into academic modifications. But that's okay. Academic modifications are another academic, and let me find out where you are and where I are. I think the two of us are seeing different things right now.
We're on visuals help everyone learn.
I think you're on priming now.
Yes, we are.
Thanks, Bonnie. Okay.
Your teacher gave me the master copy and your notes sheet so that you can fill it out beforehand, and then she's going to call on you for the first one.
Priming students means exposing him or her to course material before a lesson takes place. It gives students a chance to become familiar with the material and increases the likelihood they'll learn key concepts and details.
The teacher who stands in front of her chemistry class and says, first, we're going to read chapter 7, pages 19 to 25. Then I'm going to tell you what is important in those pages, and then you're going to do an experiment. Okay, that's priming.
What? Atoms? Exactly, atoms.
Priming is most effective when it's built into the student's daily routine, and teachers can work with parents to help reinforce this strategy at home.
What happens if you don't like the food?
I just don't spit it out.
Thank you. What do you do?
Just leave it aside.
Okay, good. And what?
I would prime him about a week before he had something due. If he had a test on Friday, the teacher made sure I knew about it on Monday. If there's a big assignment, I had to prime him for about 2 months, because out of sight, out of mind, if you do a little bit of the work 1 week and you wait 2 weeks, he forgets about the assignment.
So other examples of priming, providing class notes in advance. I do this with my university students. I have students with autism at UW-Whitewater. We have students with learning disabilities. And we have students without autism and learning disabilities who appreciate having all of the lecture notes available in an online platform. So if they're taking a class from me, everybody can have lecture notes from week 1 all up through week 15 at the end of the semester. So giving notes in advance is really helpful. Giving students questions you might ask ahead of time. Sending home the PowerPoint slides or your lectures or your plans for the next lesson. Each of these provides students with a preview of the work ahead, which can greatly help them be ready to effectively learn what you are about to teach. So when the content or format of assignments are adapted to meet the student's specific needs, that's an academic modification. Examples of academic modifications are reading directions out loud, extended time on assignments. My favorite thing, though, is to use that IEP at a glance or a cheat sheet. Not all teachers need to have access to a student's complete IEP. There could be some confidential information that not all teachers need to have access to. But teachers do need to have access to the important information that pertains to their class. So an IEP at a glance or an IEP cheat sheet for each of your students with an IEP can be really helpful and really help teachers keep on track. This video clip shows some examples of academic modifications and how they're used to promote student success.
A second strategy for teachers is to make academic modifications, adapting the content or format of assignments to meet the student's specific needs.
Academic modifications can range from read aloud directions on tests, extended time on assignments, long-term assignments if they're having trouble doing them at home. Whatever they need, I'm going to provide for them, and I'm going to be patient with them.
It could also be the case that you might have a student who has tremendous difficulty with word retrieval. So maybe I present multiple choice questions. Maybe I present a word bank.
If there's a reading assignment of 30 pages, I do not expect a student with autism to do that, unless that's their competency.
Think about how academic modifications are handled with your own school or with your particular student that you're thinking about. Where are they in the IEP that your district uses? You know, where in an IEP can you find information on academic modifications? Make sure you know that. Another key support for students on the spectrum is the use of visuals to help clarify information and promote comprehension. Students with ASD tend to be visual learners, and visuals can take many forms and should be developed based on the student's needs and preferences. So they might include pictures, written words, objects within the environment, visual boundaries or schedules, maps, labels, organization systems, timelines, scripts. One of my favorite things is for my older students who have smartphones, set up self-video modeling of a student doing a particular, let's say if I'm on a job training site and one of my students' jobs in that work environment is to use a copier machine. Having a visual video model of themselves walking through the steps of doing that particular task can be really important. Just think about what types of visuals you're using for your whole class, and then think about what types of visuals work really well for specific students. And we'll talk a little bit about various types and how they can be used effectively.
Shannon,
Yeah.
One other question for you from a questioner asking, what is your take on the use of, like, for example, an iPad or a phone, a cell phone, to be able to provide some of those visuals for older students?
Excellent. If the student enjoys using a phone or an iPad, it's an excellent use of technology. Yeah, I use it a lot. Visual supports can be an effective tool for all of the students in your classroom. And you don't have to have technology. They can be as low tech as homework written on the whiteboard, labeled areas in your classroom, labeling where the glue guns are, etc. Just highlighting relevant information. Teachers can enhance learning by providing study guides that highlight the key points of a lesson, because many students with ASD have difficulty understanding the most important part of a paragraph or even a sentence. And, a low-tech assist providing highlighted text or fill-in-the-blank study guides can be very helpful. So self-management tools can also be a visual support. I think self-management tools are one of my most used and favorite support, especially working with secondary students. They really help a student stay focused. And a self-management tool generally outlines the steps needed to complete a task, and the student checks off each step as it's completed. For example, clock times can be written next to an activity, so the student can monitor where they are at any given time. And this can easily be also done on a smartphone or an iPad, if a student prefers that. If a student has difficulty mastering a routine or understanding what it is about their behavior that isn't working, short videos on an iPad or a smartphone are also helpful. Graphic organizers often present material in a way that makes it easier for students to understand. Maybe because graphic organizers not only highlight important information and facts, but they illustrate the relationship between them. A social script is another example, and this could be a cartoon script, this could be a just pictorial script, but telling a student what to say in a particular situation. Teachers can use the Carol Gray's prescribed social story formulas, or teachers can write scripts and have them on note cards in their notebook, for example. Sometimes a script can include appropriate responses or initiations. It all varies depending on the student. Here's an example of an easy self-management checkoff or study guide. And here's an example of a graphic organizer. On the left, simple graphic organizer for breaking down content of a paragraph. On the right is an organizer for taking notes during class, reviewing the notes, and expanding on understanding. And again, these are supports that a lot of students can benefit from using, but will be particularly helpful for your students with ASD. Here's a visual for a social script. In this, a student can be reminded of what behavior is effective, what behavior is not effective. Visuals can be helpful for all of us. On the right is an example of a real messy visual that you'll see in a lot, just a whiteboard script. If you're eating in a restaurant, most of us can remember the meals available to us better if we see them on the menu rather than if they're read aloud by the server. And it's that way too for learners, especially learners with autism. They usually do better if visual supports back up what you're trying to teach. And I've got a video clip here that shows examples of students using visuals. And I want you to just think about the types of visuals you would like to incorporate or what would work in your classroom.
Because students with autism tend to be more visual learners, they may benefit from having a copy of their daily schedule or one posted in the room to help guide them through the day.
I prefer a printed schedule because that way I'd remember things more clearly, and that way I'd stay more organized.
Another visual support, graphic organizers, present material in a way that makes it easier for a student to understand.
CIAN.
They not only highlight important concepts and facts, but display the relationship between them.
Instead of this big piece of paper, it lists out all the different kinds of spaces.
Another type of visual support is what's called a social script.
Social scripts tell the student what to say in a particular situation. Quite often, the resource room teacher can write the scripts, and the student can have them on note cards or on a piece of paper in his or her notebook. For example, for the student who has difficulty asking a question, you may actually have a script that says, I forgot my math book today. Can you help me figure out what to do?
Sometimes it'll just be appropriate responses. Sometimes a student just might need an initiation statement. How do I join this group? What's an appropriate thing to say? So it's going to vary depending on how much the individual needs.
If a student has difficulty mastering a recurring event or routine, the teacher can make a short video with a smartphone or video camera.
Sometimes a way for them to really understand what it is about their behavior that needs to change, or what it is about their behavior that really worked. So if you can capture that and then link it to self-monitoring and say, okay, how did you do? Did you make eye contact with them? Did you listen when they had something to say? And many individuals with autism who could not have a conversation with you about that could look at a visual description of it and say whether or not that element was happening or needed to happen.
Right, another strategy I want to talk about is reinforcement. And we often try to use reinforcement, and we actually end up using it in ways where we think the term rewards really bothers me. Reinforcement's not reinforcing unless it's something that's particularly interesting or motivating for the person. I only do behavior if I find some type of reinforcement for it. A lot of the students I work with, verbal praise is not a good reinforcer. It doesn't work for them at all. The point is making sure you've done a functional behavioral assessment, or somebody has, you know what is motivating or works for a student, and you work that in ways to where the student feels reinforced for working on the particular objective or goal on the IEP. And it's important to reinforce students consistently to maintain productive behaviors. I have a video clip here too, but I need to be able to get to, I don't know that I can get to it. I'm going to skip that one and go right into home base. We're getting a little bit down on time. Home base is not a timeout. It is a designated place where students with ASD can go to regain control in times of stress. And do look at the modules that I linked on that handout to you about home base. It's a very effective strategy. It helps students remain calm when they're overwhelmed by their environment. The purpose of home base is to give students with ASD an exit strategy to get out of stressful situations in a safe way without distracting the class and without their behavior escalating in such a way that it could be stigmatizing in front of their peers. So with the home-based strategy, you make a plan ahead of time for having the student return to the classroom, and you might use ways like setting a timer or working through a task. Okay. Three primary supports that I haven't talked about yet can enhance your efforts when you're working with students with ASD. The individual education program, special education teachers, and paraprofessionals. So if you feel your student needs supports, identify your school's key contact for beginning the process of acquiring additional supports. I want to talk about the IEP really briefly. The IEP is that contract that the parent has with the school district. It lays out the child's present skills and the skills you should be working on with that child across the board, both academic and non-academic. And that, of course, includes vocational skills. It makes clear the supports that the student needs to ensure that this happens. The IEP is created when the student qualifies for special education. And for me, the words IEP and special education are synonymous. And developing the IEP is a collaborative process between parents, general education teachers, special educators, and key other specialists. Now, if a student's learning takes place primarily in the general education setting, as I hope it would, what if any modifications need to be made? That's what you think about and talk about. What strengths and needs do the student have? What do proper supports look like? And you can turn to special education teachers, because the role of special education teachers is to help monitor the IEP, to make sure the student is making progress, and as necessary, incorporate instruction and supports to help that student succeed. General educators and special educators should be consulting with each other on how to help students achieve their IEP goals. The specific roles of special educators depend on different schools and different relationships between the teachers, but some of those roles might include providing direct instruction to the class or specific students, to help general educators make creative modifications to the gen ed curriculum. As we've discussed previously, a student with ASD may require a different way of having information presented. So it's beneficial for general educators and special educators to have regular meetings to discuss students' progress and identify ways to complement each other's behavior. And my last slide here before questions is about paraprofessionals. Paras are not responsible for developing curriculum content. And different districts and schools have various policies and practices for using the support of paras. So the examples right here may or may not apply in your setting. But paraprofessionals or teachers' aides, they are people trained to work directly with students in the classroom They should be thought of as facilitators who help students adapt and be successful in the classroom by using the plan developed by the general ed and special ed teachers. If a para is present in the general ed classroom, they might be there to make sure the student is on task, has the materials necessary, and has the necessary and planned supports. But again, they are not responsible for developing actual curriculum. So resources I want to make sure you know about and use are from the Organization for Autism Research, and I've got a link for you on the handout, and the National Professional Development Center on Autism Spectrum Disorders. There are about 41 different 2-hour modules available. All of these are free for you to use in your own training. They're free to use for districts. Lots of handouts are available for each module and strategy. And I want you to check these out because we've developed them, various universities together, for this type of use. We want the material disseminated. All of the video clips that I used are from the Organization from Autism Research, and they were all used with permission to do so. Do we have time for questions, Bonnie?
Yes, we do, and I do have a couple if you're ready.
I am.
One of the questioners has asked, as a student with autism gets older, and this is a student who is more on the Asperger's syndrome area, they have become more less likely to want to use some of these adaptations. Do you have suggestions about how to encourage them to use some of these that will be helpful to them?
Yes, yes. Talk to that student and ask that student how they would like to develop a self-management tool that works for them. Ask that student what will make it easier for you to be successful in the classroom. Because as the student gets older, we really want to be focusing on self-advocacy and understanding their own disability, their own autism, and learning about what they want to do and what makes sense for them. So these may not be teacher-led adaptations and modifications. They may be more student-led.
Okay, thank you. And then I have one other question here, and it asks, are you knowledgeable about specific apps for iPads and phones that would be appropriate, or where would we go to find out more information about those kinds of technological possibilities?
Yes, Dr. James Collins and I just did a couple presentations, and gosh, we just wrote a book chapter, and he might have thrown a journal article out there about various apps that work specifically. We have some that are specific for students on the autism spectrum, but they're mainly focused on apps that are helpful for transitioning. So if you shoot me an email, I can send you a link that's fresh and new, just latest research from November 2018, last time we updated that.
And actually, if you wouldn't mind, if you could send that directly to me, I could handle sending them out to people if they're interested.
Yes, I will do that, Bonnie.
Okay, thank you. And then there's another question as well, and it sort of dovetailed from what you had talked about. Many of the students are of transition age and, of course, planning for their exit from school. Are there some specific tips or modifications or adaptations that you feel would be good possibilities to ease the transition process and to include some of these things in the transition plan?
Yeah, the things that I find most helpful are things, again, that focus on that student having ownership and understanding of what's useful. Self-management tools, technology, various apps really are real positive, but my research and my work has typically been in that transition from school to adult living. And what I've always focused on is supporting students explicitly and systematically in the new setting, in the new job setting, for example, providing lots of direct, explicit support, systematic, step by step, and then backing off and generalizing that support for students. So again, it depends on where that student is, what they want to be doing. Are they looking at transitioning to a academic environment? Are they looking at transitioning for recreational and social skills? Are they looking at transitioning to a job or a task environment? So the type of support provided depends on the type of transition we're looking at.
Okay, thank you. We don't have any other questions at this time. If there's like a final comment you'd like to make, Shannon?
Final comment is, if you know one person with ASD, you know one person with ASD. The supports and strategies are out there, and they are useful for so many people, regardless of the identity label that we use. Do look at those handouts and do look at those links that I provided, because honestly, they're so helpful. And thank you so much, Bonnie, for giving me the opportunity to present.
Well, thank you, Shannon. I know for a fact that all those who participated today have learned a lot from your presentation and lots of practical information that will be helpful as they move forward. This concludes our webinar. We'd like to thank you all for joining us today. Please be reminded that we have over 80 scheduled trainings and webinars for Wisconsin Facets. Please feel free to check our website calendar and register for any of the upcoming trainings that you may be interested in. Also, please watch for the short evaluation that will be coming your way after today's live webinar. Again, thank you, Shannon, so much, and thank you all for participating today. Have a good day, everybody.